Hello and welcome back to the Green Dream video series. Today I'm joined by Ross Driver, who is Fund Manager on the Foresight Solar Fund. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks, Ali.
So first of all, for those that don't know, tell us a bit about exactly what the fund invests in to get that exposure to the growing solar space.
Sure. Well, it's a good time to talk about it, actually, because we're just coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the fund that launched back in 2013. And I think it's fair to say to start, for the first 5 years, it was mainly investing in operational subsidy-backed UK solar projects. That was the first 5 years and built up a portfolio of over 700 megawatts, 50 projects here in the UK, one of the largest solar portfolios here in this country. Following that, in 2017, the fund then moved internationally into Australia, another strong market for solar and offering subsidies and strong government support. Built up 4 projects there, and latterly in 2019 built up a portfolio of 4 projects in Spain as well through our Madrid office that we have there. So that's it's been developing internationally, but it's also been moving from buying operational projects to more going into construction, building the projects out, and more latterly now development stage as well.
Okay, and in 2020 there was an adjustment to the investment policy to allow investments into battery storage systems. Could you explain a bit about the rationale behind that?
Yeah, so we see that in 2 angles really. So we see batteries as being complementary to the solar and the grid offering all over. We're producing all this intermittent generation through both solar and wind that may be producing at peak times during the middle of the day, like solar, or windy in the middle of the night, which isn't necessarily when the energy is required. So this country is going to need a lot of energy storage and battery storage to store that energy to release it at the time that the grid needs it, sort of like when we all go home, switch on the kettle, the oven, and get ready for dinner. So what we see that as a differentiated revenue stream as well. So it's coming through, it's more of a balancing and trading, more merchant strategy, but we see that as being very complementary to the solar investments as well. There is all this, the angle that we probably more going forward would look to build projects that are what we call co-located. So you've got the solar project with the battery storage element on it right from the start, which is an optimised way to look at it. But we can also think about retrofitting some of these batteries onto some of our projects to help balance out that energy generation as well.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand how that fits in now. And obviously, solar is very much on the E of ESG, but you also consider social value as well. Can you explain that and how that fits in?
Yeah, I know we put something out in our last annual report around social value. I think at a higher level, everything that we do in our funds, and we'd hope most of the funds that Foresight manages really, would be looking to invest in projects, energy generation, energy transition, sustainable, that add social value. So really, what are we looking at in terms of that makes on there? That I think, to be fair, Foresight Solar has probably always done from the outset 10 years ago. We're looking to projects that reduce carbon, reduce the carbon footprint, take that off. There are values that can be assigned to this. We're adding social value in a way. A lot of the projects we had from the early phase in the UK also had community benefits in them that we pass on to the local communities. We're a long-term investor, so we see ourselves being in these projects for the life of the assets, and therefore we want them to have good relations with the local community and become part of not just part of the landscape, but also integrated into the society as well. And then the final point is also when we've been building these projects, especially the newer ones, looking how we can use the local communities in the supply chain as well. So I think it's fair to say it's actually our in-house sustainability team that we have at Foresight who've looked to kind of quantify this, something that we're always doing. And so they've gone through something that's called the TOMS appraisal system. So it's actually looking to, and that's themes, outcomes and measures. So actually looking to put monetary values on the carbon reduction, the community benefits, which is kind of simpler, and also local employment and things like that. It still has its limits, I think they're fair to say, because these guys are in it in a lot of detail. But it's trying to sort of put a bit of measure out there and some comparability about how different funds can see what they're adding in a social value sense.
Yeah, we understand it is very difficult area to measure. So it's good that you're starting to look at this. Are you concerned about this apparent rollback in green policies in the UK? We're obviously seeing a lot of pressure on the PM from sustainable investment experts and climate scientists to stop some of these approvals of the dirtier, the browner industries that he's been going through at the moment. So is this a big concern for you?
I think it's part of the equation, and it's quite it's quite complex at the moment, because on the one side, particularly for energy generation, there have been some positives in terms of planning, and I say this completely apolitically in terms of just what we see for rolling forward renewables, really. So the planning system has eased somewhat, and that's when we're working with developers, they are more positive around that. I do think, regardless of the scaling back of some of this, that we are probably going to struggle to hit net zero targets anyway at the moment. Aside from those policies, and I think there is a bit of a policy, one could argue almost a failure here in terms of this. You look at the failed offshore wind auction and a failure to acknowledge that prices had increased, which industry we're saying, and that fell flat on its face. And also the messaging that's going to investors at the moment. I mean, we're in a global race for investment. And it's not just the UK. The UK has to see how it's positioned versus the rest of Europe, the US that's got its IRA subsidy regime, the EU's come through with its own, and other international markets. And these things are not helping necessarily with attractiveness for investors. And I'd say we will go, although we are UK headquartered, domiciled, we will go wherever the best returns are for our investors as well. The other point that's on there that I think is adding a lot of uncertainty, markets are very difficult at the moment anyway, and it's not easy to raise capital.
Say the least.
So we're already behind, I think, in terms of deployments. Most of the listed sector is locked out of being able to raise additional funds. But one thing, the sort of elephant in the room is also REMA, the review of electricity market arrangements. Okay. So there's a review out at the moment, led by Des and Zed, or sponsored by them, in terms of how the whole energy generation market could be reset or evolved. And I think most of us in the investment space acknowledge there is the need for this as you're shifting to a lot of more intermittent renewables. However, there was about 30 different permutations of what this could be, what could look like, and we're still waiting for that to be meaningfully narrowed down. And some of these changes, such as having regional-based pricing or nodal pricing almost, or pay as produce, could be fundamental changes to the market that may take up to 7 to 8 years to implement. So you'd have a long period of uncertainty there about what a new market is going to look like that could detract from investment up to 2030 when we're actually looking to build that grid. So I think it's a bit of a balance between having the perfect system and also encouraging the investment in the first place.
Okay, and so on that note, what about the rest of the world, or the rest of your outlook for the solar space, or where are the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's the last couple of years, and especially given the what's happened in Ukraine with the Russian invasion there, a lot of European countries are now looking to wean themselves off Russian gas. So there's been a big push across continental Europe as well to be pushing forward with solar, also wind projects and others. A lot of push into renewables there. I think it's we saw actually Europe has seen some of the biggest growth in terms of markets, so they're going to be adding a gigawatt plus of solar annually. You have long-standing markets such as Germany that are building out huge amounts. I would say in some ways the higher interest rates across not just the UK but Europe as well may be helping investment into that, because it's typically been very low returning for pension funds in the domestic market, could bring that market into play, particularly on the development side. But also core markets for us such as Spain would also be looking elsewhere across Europe. Interesting to see potentially other markets outside of that. I think we'd predominantly be focused on OECD countries. So we've been in Australia, could look at the US and others, but it comes down to what the revenues look like, really.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing all of that with us. We always end the Green Dream with this question. What is your favourite sustainable drink or snack?
I have heard this one before, and this may be a bit of a fudge because I'm not out for promoting any specific brands, but on a drink, I always think, and this is whenever I go home back to my family place in Lancashire, which is where I'm from originally, the tap water there is far, far better than anything we get down south, because it comes filtered from the Lake District, better than any bottled
Wow.
water. And I'd also say a lot of friends who also grow their own home-produced fruit and veg, and we have some good organic shops in North London. So that's what I'd go for in terms of that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time.
It's great. Thank you.